Congratulations on the new job.
Thank you so much.
Why did you first get involved with Planned Parenthood?
You know, it's an interesting question because I didn't actually get involved in reproductive rights or reproductive freedom struggles during college or before then. I'd always been somewhat of a race woman. I'd focused on issues of racial equality and inequity over the years, largely through the legacy of the work my parents had been doing in their respective fields. And one day I was in New York City. I was walking down the street on 6th Avenue and Spring Street, so right kind of at that at the corner of Soho, and I saw a billboard of a beautiful young black girl, looked about 5, and I just instinctively looked up, trying to figure out what she was advertising. And as I got closer, the words underneath the billboard said, "The most dangerous place for an African American is in the womb." And it just felt like a punch in the gut. It felt as though women of color, whenever we make reproductive choices, are demonized. And the fight that I knew had been evolving throughout the country around limiting access to reproductive health care was in my backyard. And I couldn't stop talking about it. And eventually I found a couple of Planned Parenthood board members, and I started talking about it even more, and they said, well, you know, I have a job for you. And found my way onto the national board, and have essentially never left.
So tell me a little bit more about your time as board chair.
Yes, so I was board chair from 2013 to 2015, and it was, I would say actually my first set of board meetings were around the 2010 Congress. So 2011, when my board term started, the 2010 Congress came in, and we started to see a number of trap laws then targeting restrictions against abortion providers. And we started to see that momentum building. And then, of course, we had a defunding from Komen. And that was kind of the beginning of my introduction to Planned Parenthood, this idea that the health care that we were providing for many, you know, young Americans, people without access, oftentimes the first point of entry into the healthcare system, was under attack and being demonized in this way. And when I became board chair and board leader, I spent a lot of time trying to really think about to build out different stakeholders and constituencies. Honestly, women like me or folks like me who had kind of been on the margins of the fight, but really, quite frankly, grew up thinking a lot of this had been settled. And my outreach to communities of stakeholders like me really kind of took a good portion of my time during my board chair term.
So one thing I'm curious about, there are a lot of different ways that you can get involved with healthcare access, especially for women of color and especially low-income women. Mm-hmm. Why Planned Parenthood?
Planned Parenthood has actually health centers on the ground, the bricks and mortar. So we have 600 health centers across the country in 50 states. And it seems as though, you know, most women I know have, if not gone to a Planned Parenthood, are connected to someone who has gone to a Planned Parenthood. And so it holds a very unique place in our hearts as a way of connecting the service provision that we get with the fight, the stance that the organization takes to protect access, right? I mean, it's really important, it's critical, obviously, to have both the healthcare provision as well as to ensure that those health centers stay open. And I think it's that nexus that really kind of drives and draws a lot of us into the space.
One thing about Dr. Wen's departure from Planned Parenthood has gotten a lot of people wondering, what is Planned Parenthood? Where are they? Are they a political organization, or are they a network of healthcare? And what is your answer to that?
Well, I think that, first of all, I have a great deal of respect for Dr. Wen. I think that the media has misread a little bit of her, of the statement that she put out about philosophical differences, because the truth is it's a false choice. We are primarily a healthcare provider. We provide access to sexual and reproductive health, in some cases primary care, to everyone. And the idea that we can provide that access depends on our ability to keep our health centers open. So we hold, you know, the politics in a way to help us kind of provide the health care. But what I would suggest is that, we're not political by nature, but we've been politicized. And that fight has actually been our focus to ensure that our health centers stay open.
So a vast majority of Planned Parenthood patients actually don't come to your clinics for abortion. Yes. I think it's only 3.5%. Mm-hmm. Is there a scenario where you would discontinue abortion services in order to make everything else that you do easier, better funded, and just easier for your patients?
Absolutely not. No, I was on the board when we voted to ensure that abortion was one of our core services that every center affiliated with Planned Parenthood would provide. We think it's a critical part of access to full reproductive and sexual health care. And so there's no scenario where we would actively decide on our own to not provide it. It is a medical procedure, it's a healthcare procedure, and we believe that it should be seen in that broad spectrum of healthcare.
I'd like to talk about Title X for a minute, because it talks about funding and where abortion fits into Planned Parenthood's host of services. So I understand right now that Planned Parenthood is opting not to take millions of dollars in federal funding, Title X dollars, mm-hmm. in order to maintain their status quo on abortion care. Are you concerned about Planned Parenthood's finances?
I'm not concerned about our finances. I'm concerned about our patients. I'm concerned that Title X, which is our nation's program to help those who cannot afford access to basic birth control and contraception, that it is being gutted. We serve 40% of Title X patients, right? Upwards of, there are 4 million total patients. We support 40% of those, and we serve them with, regardless of whether or not they can afford to pay. It's critical for us to stand up with them, to stand up with our patients, and we are not going to comply with that because it's really, it's obviously, it's the nexus again between the healthcare service provision and our fight, with it.
Obviously, these services aren't free. Do you have a strategy to make up the funds that you're losing right now?
We have been working with our partners and with our funders and supporters to address some of the resources. We will have some funds to help our affiliates navigate through this, but we feel really strong about the support that we are getting, to actually take this to the courts. Right? I mean, today we just filed a lawsuit in Missouri against the bans. We are also not complying with the Title X regulations because we believe that it's really critically important to stand up with our patients. So we are identifying all strategies, all hands on deck to try to identify the best strategies in order to make sure that we can sustain and keep our doors open for our patients no matter what.
Will fundraising be a big part of your role as president?
Absolutely, yes, of course. But that's part of most nonprofit presidencies. Yes, that we have a lot of great support. And we actually have a lot of, when I actually get online and I, get on my social media, I'm amazed at the number of people who are actually kind of tithing to Planned Parenthood, people who had direct experience with our services in their formative years, who are continually supporting because they understand what Planned Parenthood supports. So yes, fundraising, large and small, but I am so heartened by the amount of support that I've already seen by people kind of in just a small network of folks who continue to give because it's meant so much to their lives.
Has there been an uptick in donations during this past legislative cycle when we've seen all these abortion bans in Title X? Has there been an uptick in donations?
I think anytime any woman is or any person feels as though their health care is threatened or the basic services that they have been relying upon to help them make ends meet is threatened, you will see incredible support coming in. And so it's not just that those people have been threatened, it's also people who recognize that this is a critical issue. And so there has been an increase in support, both financially, but also just in terms of kind of the willingness to sign petitions, the willingness to engage, the willingness to show up at meetings and challenge our representatives on these issues. So I think support, when you think of support, it's quite broad.
Got it. And do you think tax dollars should pay for abortions? When we're talking about Title X, we're talking obviously about birth control. What about abortion? Should that be something that federal dollars go towards?
Well, currently federal dollars do not go to abortions because of the Hyde Amendment. I do think that when you look at the broad spectrum of health care and you locate abortion as one of the procedure that is, common among a third of women, then yes, I do think that tax dollars should support the broad range of healthcare. Absolutely.
Great. I'd love to talk about Missouri for a little
Sure.
bit. So tell us a little bit about the lawsuit that's happening in Missouri right now.
So today we filed a lawsuit against the state of Missouri in partnership with Planned Parenthood based in St. Louis. And we are fighting against these bans. The Missouri ban bans abortion after 8 weeks of pregnancy. Many women don't even know that they are aware of their pregnancy or may have a challenge getting into a clinic before 8 weeks. We think that is wrong. We think it is illegal, and so we are fighting. We're fighting.
I'm a little curious about the lawsuit because when I've spoken to sponsors of these bills, because they're all over the country, they're not just in Missouri.
Yes.
A lot of times the sponsors say they're not disheartened when they see these bills getting blocked in courts because that's the point. They want to trigger something towards the Supreme Court. So were you concerned that you're starting kind of the pathway towards something that could be even more destructive than just an 8-week ban in Missouri?
Look, I think we are concerned broadly about the number of bans, right? There are 26 bans, not just in Missouri. There are 26 bans across 12 states. And the courts were places right after 2016 where we were able to find stays. We were able to kind of continue the work that we were doing, and the court system really allowed us to continue that work. So far, 13 cases have been working their way up through the districts, and I do believe at some point the Supreme Court will get a case. So we are concerned about that, obviously, given the makeup of the court. But these are the strategies that we have that we need to use in order to protect the care that currently exists. Otherwise, we won't have any other recourse.
There's only one abortion clinic left in Missouri. It's the Planned Parenthood in St. Louis. They're dealing with a license battle right now. How is that connected to the 8-week ban that you're seeing in the state?
So essentially, they're tactics to get at the same thing, and the ban is obviously intended to prevent women from seeking abortion after 8 weeks. With the governor, and that we are suing, obviously, to prevent that from happening. Today, we just filed that lawsuit. The licensing ban is another tactic to prevent the health centers from being able to provide those services. So there are just multiple tactics to get at the same thing.
The license battle was very close, it felt, to shutting down abortion care at that facility. Is that something you're concerned that other states are going to see that it was almost successful, and try to replicate it in their own clinics?
Look, I think that's why I brought up the point that there are 12 states that are enacting 26 bans across the country, and we've seen this with a number of other tactics related to both abortion providers, to clinic facilities, as well as to some of these ban bills over the years. And so I do think that many state legislatures, when you look at the number of state legislatures that have been essentially anti-women's health, you can see kind of a sharing of the pattern. I also see a lot of hope in our ability on a state level to start targeting some of these state legislatures to flip them in the face of fighting for women's health. And so, yes, I do worry about the state legislatures and copycats, but I do believe in the power of Planned Parenthood in digging deep and targeting our own efforts towards turning these state legislatures.
Great. There are people who believe abortion is morally wrong. It's about 28% of Americans have said that. What do you say to those people?
77% of Americans actually have strong support for Roe. And so when I understand the moral concerns that people may have with respect to abortion, I also believe that what that 77% number is telling me is that people want the woman to be able to make that decision in concert with her medical provider and her religious provider, as it were. And so I think the question is really about whether or not the government should be involved in these decisions, or if a woman has a right to make these decisions with her God and her doctor.
I spent some time at the National Right to Life conference, and there seems to be, they're moving away from the idea that this is a religious argument, and they're leaning more into science and saying that, you can detect fetal heart activity at 6 weeks. A fetus can feel pain at a certain level. I mean, what do you say to people who are telling you that, there's life there and it's a unique, human being potentially?
What I say is, again, these are decisions that have to live in the purview of a woman, her family, and her doctor and her, religious counsel if she has them. And that, I'm not the arbiter on science or on their morality. I do believe that the government's role in this is minimal, if non-existent, and that these decisions, for a woman to be able to make them, it's critical for her to be able to have the folks that she chooses around to make them with her.
Got it. I've noticed that in a lot of state laws, there's some very strong language about abortion. In particular, in Alabama, I noticed that they likened abortion to the Holocaust, to Chinese purges, Stalin's gulags, Cambodian killing fields. I'm quoting from the legislation right now, and this isn't some silly bill that was introduced and died. Like, this is state law now. Mm-hmm. What is your reaction when you hear abortion being compared to the Holocaust?
I mean, I think that the lengths that people will go to criminalize women and their choices is extreme. Again, I believe that there is significant, extreme rhetoric that is guiding many of these bills, and I have deep concern about how the rhetoric impacts and shames women for making these choices. And so I think it's horrible that this language is in there. I think it fundamentally misunderstands what is at stake here with respect to women's reproductive freedom, and I find it reprehensible.
What is at stake here with women's reproductive health care decisions?
Look, I think that we are very concerned about Roe, obviously, right? I mean, we have a court that hangs in the balance. We have several cases that hang in the balance, and I do believe that that our ability to access women's reproductive health care, given these bans, given the significant number of legislation, options that people are taking, given the impact that Title X could potentially have on limiting doctors' ability to even offer the best options through the gag rule, I think all of these things are chipping away at women's reproductive freedom. So, what's at stake is our ability and our access to control our own lives through our reproductive choices.
A lot of people view Planned Parenthood as synonymous with abortion care, even though there are many other services you provide. Yes. And in having this role, you're going to be the face of that procedure, which is a very polarizing one. How are you preparing for that?
I'd say I'm the face of an organization that stands up for people who need access to sexual and reproductive health care, and I stand proudly in saying that. I stand proudly in saying that reproductive health care and sexual freedom should include abortion. I also stand here as a member of one of many faces of the organization and the 13 million supporters that stand with Planned Parenthood. So, I've quite prepared in doing that. I've been doing it for 10 years as a board leader, and there's no shame. I think we need to take away the stigma, from thinking about abortion as anything other than basic health care.
What about security and safety? I know that violent attacks against abortion providers hit a record high last year. Are you concerned about your and your family's safety while taking this role?
The organization takes great pains to ensure that all of us are protected in the work that we do. I stand here completely proud to serve, and I don't worry about my safety in the same way. I worry about the millions of patients and their safety and security in being able to get the reproductive care that they need. I worry about their ability to cross into a center without protesters yelling and screaming and taking their pictures and what other behavior that would serve to shame and demonize their reproductive choices. So I sit in this position as a servant, in order to ensure that they have the best experience that they can possibly have seeking access to sexual and reproductive health care.
If Roe were to be overturned, it would not necessarily mean that, of course, abortion is illegal. It would just mean that in certain states, women couldn't access abortion. Is it essential that women are able to have access to abortion in every state, even if it's not necessarily reflective of their constituents?
Yes. I mean, your health care shouldn't be determined by your zip code. So it is critically important for all women to have access to, or all people to have access to sexual and reproductive health care here in whatever state they choose. And I think it's really important for us to, we know it doesn't mean abortion will go away. We know that there will certain states that will be available, and we have to consider what the future of access to abortion will look like under this patchwork. But what we don't want to do is go back to, to times where people were making very awful choices, life-threatening choices to access abortion care or connecting to providers that aren't as trusted in their communities. So the more available access to abortion is in your own community, the more likely you will be able to make a choice that will be safe. And so that's really of our concern. It's not, creating a patchwork opportunity to get people access is not, is something that we will build towards. But what we're fighting for is for a woman to access that in every state, in every community that she exists.
Are there any 2020 candidates that you like right now?
Well, I will tell you, one of the things I'm most heartened by over the last, I guess it was in June, we held a forum called We Decide, where we put together an opportunity for I think 18 or 19 candidates came together in South Carolina to talk about issues of sexual and reproductive freedom, and we had an amazing opportunity to get them on the record. Every single Democratic candidate so far has come out with a strong intent around issues of sexual and reproductive health care. So I'm happy to let the process on that side determine. I certainly know what we have in office currently, and so I think that any candidate who will continue to fight for women's freedom and the freedom of many to access health care will be a great candidate, and I encourage people to learn more about them.
I know the Hyde Amendment was originally an issue for Biden. Is that federal dollars for abortion, is that something that you're going to be absolutely looking for in a candidate?
Look, I think that we have a committee that is making decisions on that with respect to our scorecard, and we will be talking to each candidate and understanding kind of where they rate on a variety of issues with respect to everything from safe access to abortion, to federal dollars for it, to Title X and access to contraception care. So I'm looking forward to seeing how the candidates respond, and then leaving it to our incredibly capable teams to help us vet that.
But are you concerned, because I understand there are certain clinics that have had to stop providing abortion care, namely in Missouri, for the medical abortion. Are you concerned when you do that, though, you're creating more stigma around abortion?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that is one of the things that we are, that's why we fight so hard, right? Because the stigma is not something that can just be beaten through keeping the health centers open. It's also work that we need to do on a cultural level. It's work that we need to do kind of in some of the narratives that are driving around abortion as well. And so it is important for our health centers to remain open. It is important for, many of our health centers are places that are the first point of entry into the healthcare system. So there's a service need that continues to exist that Planned Parenthood is filling a gap for. And so we will continue to fight. It's not like they are choosing not to provide abortion. If a state is telling them that they can't, that becomes a different issue. And so far, that we're up against the wall. And I think those are some really strong decisions that we're going to have to make.
Have you or a family member ever been part of an abortion? Did you have a personal experience with that procedure?
I think that's a personal question, and I will leave it as a personal question.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
How important is it that every single heartbeat bill that was passed this legislative session, they're all in court right now?
It's a big moment. It is. Today we filed a lawsuit against the Governor Parsons of Missouri because we, along with our partners at Planned Parenthood, St. Louis and ACLU. Because we think it's critical to stop these bills, to stop these bans against a woman's ability to get access to an abortion.